Hey everybody, this is Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the show where I talk to writers of all sorts of backgrounds, and we have a good time. We chat, we get to know each other a little bit better. It's kind of like meeting somebody at a cocktail party and just picking their brain a little bit. And at the end, we make up a story together. And when I talk to writers of all sorts. I've had a variety of different writers on the show today, and today was no different. I had on today's guest was Daniel Jude Miller. So Daniel Jude Miller is a children's book YA author and illustrator. So his background is really interesting. So he was, he's obviously very talented with illustration, and his degree is in illustration, but he also has had, started having story ideas and wanted to write stories to accompany his illustrations. He didn't want to necessarily, have somebody else do that. So, when it was pitched to me to have him on the show, I liked the angle of talking to him about how do you make money, doing all of this yourself. So he basically created his own publishing company, and he's the one who's in charge of everything. And that's a lot of risk, but it's also a lot of freedom and certainly higher margins if your sales go well. And his angle is, it's not an angle, but his marketing approach is he goes and actually talks to schools. So he has captive audiences of schools, of kids, where he can talk about, the whole process, start to finish, of creating a chapter book with illustrations. And they can engage in that, and then they can order the book, and the schools pay him to do this as well. So it was just great talking to him and learning that whole process of how do you, what are other ways as a writer and an illustrator that you can make money and support yourself aside from going the traditional publishing route. And he had a lot of good insights, and it was certainly interesting to listen to his what happened with the pandemic. All of a sudden you can't go visit these schools anymore, and you shifted to virtual events. How does that affect your livelihood? So he was great to talk to. Again, his name is Daniel Jude Miller. Some of his recent books include Monsters in Manhattan and Monsters in Manhattan 2 and 3. So I think you'll get a lot out of this. I certainly did. He's a very engaging guy. This is my conversation with Daniel Jude Miller.
Hello.
How are you?
I am terrible. No, I'm just kidding. I'm good, actually, but doesn't everybody always say good? So terrible is a much more...
Not always. Sometimes people are doing terrible, and they will let you know every little aspect of their terribleness. Those are the fun conversations.
No, I'm doing very well. It's just, well seems boring. A boring way to start a story.
Well, so tell me about your baseball hats.
That didn't take long. It's my only other hobby other than writing and drawing is collecting baseball hats. You can't even see them all. There's about 347 hats, all baseball, no basketball, hockey, nothing like that. A lot of hats.
I like the attention to detail with the lighting choices that you chose for your hats. It's I don't know if it's holiday-ish or if it's always that kind of colorful, but it's nice. It's well lit.
Well, actually, it's not even for the hats, really. It's that most of the time, like, since I do a lot of virtual author visits for schools, I talk on the camera a lot. So I need to kind of spruce up what they're seeing. So it's more for the visual than the hats.
Keep them interested.
You know what? When you have to go through a computer and talk to first graders for an hour, your face isn't going to be enough to keep them entertained for 60 minutes. So you use everything at your disposal, and lighting works just for a few minutes to keep their attention.
You are preaching to the choir of every teacher who taught during 2020, much to their chagrin. They were really challenged by that. So I'm doing a lot of, so let's back up a little bit. Tell me a little bit about, I know you write children's books, but tell me kind of just the lane of children's books that you write. Like, who are they targeted to? Do you do the writing and the illustrations, that kind of a thing?
So I am illustrator first, illustrator since I was very young, 8 years of art school. I worked for like 15 years doing editorial illustration, never wanted to be a writer. That was never even remotely a possibility. And then I accidentally, like it happens, I got an idea and I had that choice of whether or not you were going to give that idea to someone else and that I would just illustrate it, or I was going to do it myself. And this is as an adult, I decided, you know what, I think I just want to do it myself. So I started out doing picture books, even though my picture books tend to be pretty wordy. They're not your basic, see spot run type books. But then from there, I actually started writing more long form. And so now I've been working half and half on picture books and middle grade novels and doing all the illustration and all the graphic design for both.
Wow. So where'd you grow up?
I actually grew up, I spent most of my life in New York City and Queens, but then when I wanted to raise a family, I moved upstate. So now I'm in upstate New York.
Whereabouts?
In Binghamton.
Oh, I know Binghamton well. I went to school in Ithaca. So and I've got family in Ithaca as well. So I know that region quite well.
Yeah,
I've flown to Binghamton before.
Oh, you might be the only one, because I was just at the airport, believe it or not, like 3 days ago, and we asked them, there's only one flight a day that goes in and out, and she said there's only 10 people a day come into the airport. So this is a very underutilized airspace.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a nice area. It's a quiet area, so I can see it's very, very different than Queens, I would imagine.
Yeah, you know what it is like, that if you ever heard that saying, like, live in LA, but leave before you get too soft, and live in New York, but leave before you get too hard.
Yeah.
And I had gotten to a point where it just wasn't working for me anymore. Like, I needed some space. And so now we live out in the woods. And I always say, we have enough lawn to make a city boy feel like he has property, but I don't have so much that the people around here laugh at me when I tell them, oh, we have this much. And they're like, I have 55 acres. I'm like, oh, God,
yeah.
No, that's too much.
Yeah. That's like preparing for the end of the world kind of amount of property. Yeah. But my wife at the time and I had the same kind of arc in terms of we were in Miami when we were younger, and we're at the point where, like, we wanted to start having a family, and we're like, we're not having a family in Miami. This place is terrible. So we moved to Colorado, and it was, polar opposites. And, I've been here 25 years since. So it was a much better decision. So you grew up in the borough of Queens, and you obviously probably had a natural talent for drawing and illustrating, I assume. So then you went 8 years of art school. What is that? I mean, do you have like a medical degree in art at this point?
Well, no, I say 8 years because I actually went to specialized art high school.
Oh,
so
I see.
Did 4 years of intense art high school and then 4 years of art school in Manhattan. And I, believe it or not, like, so that's the interesting thing. I graduated as an illustrator, and basically as an illustrator, it's just the same thing over and over and over again. It's not like interior design where you can keep elevating yourself. Illustration's illustration. And then they kind of just throw you to the wolves and go find work. And it's not the easiest thing to do. Luckily,
and what's common for work like that? Do a lot of people go into like advertise? I mean, because you're probably also learning graphic design. It's probably not, or is it just hand-drawn illustration was kind of your focus?
At the time, it was hand-drawn illustration. And that was going to be just what I did. I didn't have any intention of doing anything else. And basically, you're doing magazine work. So, which is, it's hard to get. It's not reliable because you're kind of always looking for work all the time. But then I kind of got lucky, and I ended up in a staff job at an advertising agency doing cartoons. And believe it or not, I worked there for 12 years in the Empire State Building. I did over 10,000 cartoons.
Oh, wow.
The truth is, honestly, very few of which I was proud of, because it was a day job and it was a way to make money. But then accidentally, while I was at that job, I started getting writing ideas. That's where it started happening. And the next thing I knew, like, that job ended. And when it went away, I was living up here now. There's not a whole lot of art jobs in upstate New York. So you had to kind of evolve. And the decision was, I had done all this writing sort of on the side, but I never thought it was going to be a career. Now, I knew how to illustrate, but I never really put two and two together and said I should just do my own books. But then, it became a necessity because I didn't have a job.
Well, I mean, and that's not a surefire hit to like, okay, I need a job, so I'm going to write, that's a very scary prospect as well. But you were saying you're doing writing on the side. What does that mean? What kind of writing on the side were you doing?
I was doing all sorts of writing. I'm a person that I have like a lot of projects going on at the same time. And so I was writing some sort of longer form stuff, some sort of chapter type things. But I had tons of like children's book ideas. You're right. When you need a job, like turning to writing is probably not the smartest choice. But what had happened for me is, because since I decided I was going to do the drawing and the writing, and I was going to actually leap into the publishing side of it and sort of run it myself, what I found was that the easiest way to do that was going straight to the kids. So what happened was it actually turned into a job really, really fast. And I ended up doing schools. And when you go to schools and talk about your books and the process and teaching them how to write and draw, it turned out that it was super, super validating for me. It was also lucrative. So all of a sudden, I went from having no job in writing to having a job where I was selling tons of books, and I was working 5 days a week showing students how to write and explaining how I write my stories.
So that's interesting. And when we were kind of emailing back and forth about you coming on, I really liked the idea of talking to you about being a writer / illustrator and being self-made. There's so many opinions about, say in the pure writing sense of like novel writing, not illustrating, there's so much discussion about, do I self-publish, right? Because it's as it's a brutal industry, right? It's very hard to land your book somewhere. And if you do, it's by no means you're making much money at all off of it. You're just kind of one foot in the door. So a lot of people turn to self-publishing, and that is fraught with its own peril, right? I mean, because you have the noise of everyone else who's self-publishing. It's really hard to get known. You sound like you're in a very unique position I will just back up for a second. So when you had this idea of like, I'm going to put these two aspects of my creativity together, you knew it was definitely targeted to kids. Okay. So what year is this? Are we talking about?
2016.
Okay. So take me through the process a little bit. So you can obviously write and put the art together, and you're going to, so then you physically publish your first book and you create X number of copies of it, correct? And then you say, I'm going to go to schools. So tell me what that process is like. You're reaching out to schools saying, I want to come in and lecture and have the ability. Are you able to sell your books there?
Okay, so here's how it started. I'm actually doing the graphic design, the illustrating, the writing, and I think, so again, when you talk about self-publishing, right? To me, there's actually two kinds. There's self-publishing for the people that make a book and then put it on Amazon, and it's sort of a print-on-demand type deal. But to me, that's more like Amazon publishing. I decided I was going to legit be a publisher, which cost $20,000 right out of the gate. Right, sure. It was an enormous amount of money because I needed stock. I wasn't going to rely on Amazon to print them because I wanted mine to be of the highest quality. So all my books are hardcover. They were all going to have dust jackets and all the bells and whistles. I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between mine and any other book in Barnes & Noble. But still, I think, okay, great. Well, let's do 2 books to launch the company. We're going to go on. We'll sell them on Amazon, and I'll be rich in a matter of months. And that was the first lesson, that it doesn't really work like that. And so I ended up going to a book show up in Watertown, New York, to try to start selling and getting the word out. And I ran into another author who was self-published the way I was, who had an entire stock of thousands of copies. And he had sold hundreds of thousands of copies on his own with no big publisher. He was the publisher.
Also children's books?
Middle grade books.
Yeah, middle grade. Yeah.
So, and he had said to me, he was a super great guy. He said, listen, you got to go to schools because that's where it's at, because, you'll get to interact with your audience, but also, you'll get to sell books. And I said, okay, fine. I said, can I come and meet you just once? Like, and can I watch you do it? Because I had never done it. And I'm watching this and I'm going, there's no way that I can do this, right? It's a room full of 500 people. And, speaking in public is an issue for most people. And I'm thinking, there's no way. And right at that moment, when I'm thinking this is not the career for me, he says, I have a guest today. I want to bring him up. And I'm literally petrified, right? And so I go up on stage and he hands me the microphone. And my hand is like shaking. And this is literally a room of second graders. And I'm an adult and have a whole career, but I'm petrified. He asked me one question and I sat down and I drove home. I said to my wife, I told her how it was going. And I said, I can't do this. There's no way. And she said, you better figure it out because we have $20,000 worth of books.
Right.
And I said, okay. Luckily, what happened was, it was in June. So that gave me the entire summer to sort of work on a program and to give me some confidence. And then the strangest thing happened when the school year started and I started reaching out. All of a sudden I started getting a huge response. And I did the first one. And the first one was supposed to be a group of about 50 kids. And I thought, perfect. That's like the perfect way to sort of ease into this career. And then it got snowed out. So they rescheduled. So the first one ended up being a room full of 700 kids. And the truth is, though, I tell this story on stage all the time. They handed me the microphone and it didn't bother me. Yeah. Because I think I had just all of a sudden, you'd found your element. And I have like the best time ever just talking to kids and listening to them, getting ideas, showing them what I do. And it just took off from there.
Yeah, I have a few things to comment on. One is, so public speaking, that's the bane of many writers' existence. And a lot of writers will be like, fuck it, I'm not doing that. Or I'll do a 5-minute reading, and a lot of them are terrible at it, and they shouldn't be doing it. I fully believe that and for you especially, this is part of your job. Writing is only part of the job. The other part is marketing yourself and getting out there. And a lot of that means if you're an introvert, you've got to learn to tuck that away. You should take public speaking courses. And just once you start doing it, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. And it makes a big difference. And in your case, it's, that's your opportunity. That's the main chance you have to get eyes on your product. So you have to learn how to do that. So it's great that you kind of overcame that because it's important. I want to know a little bit about the actual act of reaching out to schools. What's that process like? So you're just calling certain classes or how do you actually get booked?
I don't recommend calling. That's just me. There are a handful of people that do that, but I've been in so many schools and teachers are crazy busy. So you don't want to really interrupt them. It's really simple. Like there's usually one person or two people that are going to set these events up. And most schools in America do this almost every year. So it's either the library or the PTA/PTO, whatever the parent group is. Those are the two people usually responsible for setting it up. I just reached out to a lot of them. And, the more people I was reaching out to, like you said, it pays to be good at it because the truth is, I'm going to be honest, like probably 80% of the librarians I talk to say that the people they have come in, they're not necessarily the best for the students, right? Because they're not great at public speaking. They're not organized. They don't have a program. And for me, because I have the luxury of showing kids every part of a book, right? I write the story, I draw the drawings, I put it together. I have an advantage over someone who is only the author. So I do encourage like anyone who is attempting to do this, you really want to be prepared because it's not easy. I mean, it's 45 minutes of talking to a bunch of second graders who like to move around a lot. So if you're not entertaining enough, they're going to leave or they're going to lose interest. If you're too entertaining, then the teachers don't like it because it's not educational enough. So you have to kind of find this balance between teaching them things, but also being fun.
And your market's not just the kids, right? Your market is that librarian or is that teacher who may or may not choose to bring you back next year, may or may not choose to recommend you to another school. Because I imagine that's probably a part of it as well. You probably get referrals based on, hey, I really like this guy. He really engaged with the kids and didn't talk down to them. You should have him in your school. Does that happen?
Correct. Yeah. You know, what's funny, when I first started, I had like, the thing that made me the most nervous was actually male teachers, because I just kind of assumed that a male teacher would see me coming in, doing all my, you know, my sort of shtick, and kind of like shrug it off like this is just kind of goofy. But so I kind of always ignored male teachers. I wouldn't look at them because I was kind of somewhat embarrassed. But the truth is that the teachers, male or female, have always been super engaged with what I had to say, because I was talking. I can't tell how many teachers come over to me after, forget about booking me for their other school, that come over to me and say, "Hey, can you help me? Because I wrote something, and there's so many, you know, undiscovered or starting authors and illustrators that are out there, that there's a lot of teachers that get a lot of information from me that they can hopefully use to maybe start doing their own books." So, I mean, I don't know. It's funny because they always tell me like there's something about the way I do my presentations that keeps these kids focused. And I haven't figured out what it is. Some people said it was my voice. I do not think I have a great voice. Some people said it was the way I speak, because I'm from Queens. I still have a certain amount of Queens accent, and they're not used to that. So it keeps them in a certain place. I don't know. All I know is that I think it's mostly sincerity. Is that when I'm there, it's my favorite place in the world to be. And the sad part is I haven't been there now in going on close to 2 years. I have to do it like this, and that definitely hurts the experience.
And so I'm fascinated by the whole classroom presentation thing. So when you go in there, I'm assuming they're not paying you to go there.
Oh, yes, they are.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Oh, yes.
So they're paying you, but how is that also translating? How does it translate into sales of your books?
So I do it very, very different than almost anyone I've ever met that does it. So first of all, they're paying me, right? So either the PTA is paying me or they get grants, and it actually pays very, very well, like for a day of talking to first and second graders. Okay, and I'm actually one of the least expensive people out there, because I try to be respectful to the budgets that they have.
Right.
So they'll pay me to come in. Generally, I do around 4 or 5 45 to an hour presentations, and it gets broken up sort of by age group. And each presentation I do this is very different than other authors too. Every presentation I do is different, because first graders and sixth graders are different in how they perceive. Yeah, and also what they are interested in. So luckily for me, since I've written nursery books and I've also written chapter books, I have enough work that I can spread it around. And I do very, very different presentations. And then what I do different is I bring order forms with me. And every kid goes home with an order form, and they also go home with a free poster, because I want to make sure that students get something. Even if they don't order a book, they have something to remember me by. And then the school collects all the order forms and send it to me, and I ship out the books. And it was, like I said, you have a captive audience. Okay, so they're basically bringing on certain days 1,000 customers right to my doorstep, and now it's my job to convert them into, and I don't like to look them as commodities, but I want them to learn, and I want them to have fun, but I am also there to hopefully move some books. And so, I mean, what better way, than to having your audience right there? I couldn't think of a better way to run a book business.
And then you're physically fulfilling those orders yourselves out of your house and shipping and all that kind of stuff. So you're busy.
Yeah, it's every box of books weighs 32 pounds. I've carried, dropped, moved hundreds of cases of books on my own.
I'm sure.
I always say to my wife, I should have gone into the pillow business, because it's a lot easier to move those. But look, the thing is, what I lose in time, because there's so many jobs to do, you gain in freedom. Because if, like you said, if I went through the traditional publishing route, A, there's a lot of hurdles, but B, there's a lot of restrictions and things that I wouldn't be able to do that I actually do enjoy doing.
But your books still exist available for purchase on those other venues, on Amazon, on BNN. Yeah. So, maybe you're not putting, they're there so people can get them there. And I assume they could even go to the order form, and that's an option you could find it on Amazon because that might be easier for them. But that's, I mean, it's fascinating to me because, you know, I talk to a lot of writers, and we always talk about, and not just novelists, you know, science fiction writers and poets and anyone who's engaged in the realm of writing, whatever degree it's in, you know, and just the concept of money and making money. How do I make a living at this? It's hard, man. Like, there's very few people who are self-supportive in that field to a decent level. You know, some people can do it and they're like, I'm at the poverty level, but I'm doing it. So it's nice to hear, you know, your story, because it's possible. That being said, you're clearly doing a lot of things that a lot of people don't necessarily, as writers, you know, not to stereotype, have the acumen for, which is the business side of things, right? You have to understand all of the business side and the costs, and not just the writing of the book. So has that been a progression for you, as well as like kind of learning the books, like learning the actual books, the financials, and kind of making those decisions? Or is that always something that has been natural for you?
Oh no, not even a little was it natural. No, this has been a constant learning curve. You know, look, I have a project that I just finished, and I wrote it. It's half illustration, half writing. We wanted to launch it back about a year ago. The price of paper was through the roof. Now, most authors never think about that because they're not in charge of it, but I had to monitor the price of paper because it was cost prohibitive to even produce the product. And so that was something I learned about. In the past, I just printed because the price was always the same. But then throughout these last couple of years, like everything else, the prices are up and down and all over the place. So this is a constant learning experience. I mean, if you go back in March, 2020, there's another part to this job that not everyone would enjoy, and it's a lot of traveling. I was on the road, 4 days a week, like traveling from Long Island to upstate to Pennsylvania to Atlantic City. I enjoyed that part. I enjoyed just being out there, checking in and out of hotels. Not everybody would like that. And then all of a sudden, one day, it just all went away.
Yeah.
And you're just looking at yourself. And I mean, probably through the schools accounts for probably 90% of what my sales were. And overnight, it just disappeared. And now slowly it's starting to come back. But, you never know nowadays because things come back for a little bit and then go away again. So as a business owner, it's kind of hard to plan with these conditions.
Yeah, for sure. So but it's going to go away. I mean, it's going to come back at some point. Hopefully, let's be optimistic about it. And you're not limited to, obviously, to New York or New Jersey. You can go anywhere. Although traveling, I mean, that's hard on the family a little bit, but it's also, even though it's a business expense, it gets expensive. Hotel rates are going up, and I assume you're mostly driving, but it's very pricey. So you have to be very cognizant of that and how much that's cutting into your margins as well. So you started your own publishing company. So I have a buddy who did this, and he didn't do it. He did it because he just wanted to, because he really liked a certain style of work. Have you ever considered, now that you have this publishing company established, actually publishing other authors and kind of building a whole kind of actual larger publishing company around it?
Eventually, yes. Eventually. Now is obviously not like the prime time to be taking on more projects. But yeah, eventually the idea is, because once you build the pipeline and you have the network of ways to sell the books, right? You have the connections and actually I'm working with another author now. We're going to start doing potentially two-man sort of presentations. That's an idea that's being thrown around. So now, since I kind of know how to do that, and I know how people buy books, like I'm pretty good at knowing the size of an audience. I could pretty much guess how many books you're going to sell based on the size of the audience, because it usually falls within the same range. Once you've learned those things and you get used to speaking to an audience, and have / selling to an audience, you can now, like you're saying, plug in new authors to that experience and then basically build the catalog. Unfortunately, now, I'm like a lot of authors that do what I do, we're still getting back in the swing. I mean, I had my first in-person visit was supposed to be last week, and it got canceled because of whatever, what's happening.
Omicron, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and now the school systems are all hopeful for the spring that like everyone like that'll be better, and I'm crossing my fingers. So now what it is, it ends up going like this, like through virtual meetings. Which the problem with those is they're great for the students, right? Because it gives them access when otherwise they'd have nothing. It's not great for the authors because, I mean, I can't tell you how many hours I've spent staring at this camera, and I can't see the kids. The funniest thing that happens is that the teachers don't realize this. When I'm doing it virtual, I have to clear the screen and I can't see the classrooms of the kids. So I'm basically just looking at the camera. And then every once in a while, I'll be all into my thing and I kind of forget that like I'm talking to an audience, and a kid will laugh. And you'll see me jump like on the camera because I kind of almost get in the zone and I forget that there's like other people in the room. And then, because they assume that I can see them, but I just can't. I have to do it like that. It's just, after I've literally done hundreds of these virtual ones, and I hope the kids get a lot out of it. But for the authors, it's a lot more difficult to do.
Yeah, you feed on any kind of live performance, any kind of public speaking, you do feed on the energy of the audience, whether that's a good energy or a bad energy. It informs how you continue throughout your presentation, and it can certainly embolden you, and it can certainly be exhilarating, and you finish it and you feel excited and pumped up. And when you do it virtually, you're just like, okay, that's done. Click off the camera. There's not that feedback loop that you would kind of hope for. So I can see that would be hard. Have you found doing virtual, when you talk about you could predict the number of sales roughly per capita of student, has that ratio gone down with virtual events?
Yes, it's gone down a lot. And that's like what you're saying. So again, when you're doing an event, they feed off your energy, right? So you're getting them to laugh and you're taking them on a journey. I'm doing 90% of the same presentation virtually, but there is a disconnect between the sort of like the connection to the actual physical books. Because when you're there, you'll have them on the stage, you'll have piles of books. And It's just like when like an impulse buy in a store, if you can see it and if you can touch it, then you want it. When you do it virtual, I think they get the education part of it, but it is definitely a harder way, a more difficult way to run a business.
When all these, so you've done hundreds of these virtually, so it didn't stop for 2 years. You've done, right. But for a while it stopped. What were you freaking out? Were you saying, okay, well, this is going to be a while, so I'm going to go work on something else that I've been wanting to do that I haven't had the time to do? Or what were those months like?
Well, luckily it wasn't months. It was more like month. It ended.
All right.
And I keep in mind, I'd never done a virtual visit before the pandemic started, because I had like a philosophy that kids spend too much time on screens as it is.
Totally.
So I was like, I didn't even offer it. I would only offer in person, and that was it. This happened. I spent about a month, like everybody else, like running in a circle in the house, debating like, what do you do? Because you were in the middle, like I was in the middle of things. There were book orders that were out that hadn't come back. You don't even know, like, is that money coming? Is it not? And then it took about a month, and then the phone calls started coming for the virtual things. They actually came pretty quick. So I had to pivot pretty fast and learn how to do it, both in making sure your cameras are working and all that stuff.
Getting good equipment.
I didn't even have a camera actually at the time. I had to order a camera so that I could even start. And then at the end of 2020, I did a lot because they were pretty desperate to do any type of content because all the kids were home at the time. So it was a weird month there. And then once the summer came, I started questioning, like, what do you do now? Like, because nobody knew what September was going to be like. So I decided I had a project. It was huge and required so many illustrations. I never thought I'd ever be able to finish it. And then a pandemic came, and I knew that I would have nothing to do for essentially 8 or 9 months. So I ended up just drawing, and I didn't write like hardly anything for like 9 months, and prepared to do that. And then September came, and I thought, all right, we should be okay. And we weren't okay. That was
No,
last year.
no, it was just starting.
Yeah, so I spent another school year doing a lot of these virtual things. And, again, they have their benefits, right? You get to wake up in the morning and come into your office and do what you got to do, and then you're done. There's no traveling. But you know what it is? I don't do this for the money, really. Like, the money's useful and necessary, but I really have this amazing connection with going down and seeing kids in different places, rural kids and city kids, and talking about books and ideas. And there's something sorely lacking with doing it over these things.
Oh, no question. I mean, and that transcends all industry, right? How many people are complaining about just being so sick of being at home. And, although a lot of people have also learned a lot about themselves, right? And learned, I actually enjoy not setting an alarm every day, and I'm more productive. So it depends on the industry you're in. But with you, I mean, yes, you're a writer and an illustrator first, but you're also an entertainer, right? So you're like, look at all the stand-up comedians who haven't been on the road and haven't been in front of people, and they can't access the energy that they need to access in order to do their job. I mean, you have to have that. And, again, it's going to come back, but you could very easily have collapsed, in these last 2 years, like a lot of companies have. It could have been a death blow to kind of the business model that you established for yourself. So it speaks well to you and your business acumen that you've figured out how to make it continue.
It's not easy. You're right, though. Like I keep telling myself it'll come back. And actually, it's sort of like the law of, nature, right? So it'll have weeded out some of the people who couldn't pull it off, and maybe shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. So there'll actually be less people doing what I do when it comes back. And that's actually going to be good for business. So if you can survive long enough, which I'm really crossing my fingers for September 2022, because it's, or maybe this spring if we're really lucky. But yeah, hopefully one day it comes back and you can get back out there and do this, because the truth is like, if it was up to me, and like my wife always goes, well, what if you could just sell a lot of books on Amazon? And I'm like, well, that'd be great for the mortgage, but the truth is, it's just no fun, right? Like it's no fun. Like when you write books, and especially kids books, you want to see their reaction. Like you want to show them things that they've never seen before and watch them laugh. And I want to see kids. There's a lot of things I hide in my books. Like every one of my books has like a hidden game. And when I go there, they've usually been alerted about that. So having them run over to you excitedly and showing you that they found all the things in the book,
right,
to me, like
it's very fulfilling.
Right. I mean, boxing books up and shipping them to Amazon's fulfillment centers, it just doesn't fill the void. I mean, I need the money, but the point is there's something missing,
Right. Right. Because you could be doing a lot of different things that wouldn't be fulfilling, that you could make a lot of money in. Right. So that you've chosen to kind of go a path that is fulfilling. I mean, the other side of all of this is that you are predominantly doing these visits in New York. You probably could have, if you wanted to, have set up a tour of the South, where you could have gone to any school at any time, and they would, maybe at risk to you, but did you ever consider like going to schools where they weren't closing down or they weren't limiting class sizes or anything?
It's funny you say that, because you said the thing about comedians before, and I'm a pretty avid fan of comedians, and that's what had happened for them, is that these in New York and New Jersey, none of the clubs were open, so they were doing tours of the South because those clubs were open. It's funny how when I was doing schools last year, if I would do New York schools, they were all virtual. If I would do Texas schools, they were all in the classroom. It was just wild for me to see. I didn't really consider that because on one hand, I wanted my sort of fix of doing the schools. On the other hand, I also did not want to be in Florida and be sick. Like so
Yep.
I had to kind of weigh those two things. Plus, I actually don't know if even though they had the kids in the building, they were still keeping them pretty grouped off. And so
Yeah.
the problem with what I do is it puts 500 people in one room at the same time.
Right.
And I don't think even in Texas, they were that bold to try.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, maybe not. But yeah, like, and yeah, hopefully spring, more probably next fall. So it's a long slug for everybody, but it seems like you've really made the best of it, and you seem very committed to the vision that you have for what you're doing. And I think, above all else, I think you're an example of a creative person who has figured out how to make that creativity, transcend just normal work and actually making money off of it and doing what you enjoy doing. And that's, like I said earlier, that's a terrifically hard thing to do, and not many people do it. So kudos to you. Before we wrap up, we're going to do a little storytelling.
Absolutely.
And so I've got 3 books here. I'm going to have you choose one, and we're going to pick a sentence, and we're going to create a short story. And it could be YA, it could be horror, it could be nonsensical, it could be whatever we want to do. So I'm going to give you 3 options. None of them are middle grade books. Baldacci's Absolute Power, which I remember reading, I think when it came out. I loved that book. Joyland by Stephen King, which is a great kind of a pulpy kind of a story. And then just I remember getting this at Thriller Fest a few years ago, an anthology of thriller short stories, First Thrills, edited by Lee Child. So pick one of those.
That's a tough choice. You had me by the Stephen King one, but then the third one seemed intriguing. I'm going to go with Stephen King only because my son actually wants to be a horror writer, and so you can't go wrong with Stephen King in that sense.
True. Although it's funny because I'm a pretty committed Stephen King reader. I've got a couple shelves over there that's just his stuff, and probably the last 15, 20 years, very little of what he writes is horror. It's just a good, darker, but good, almost like thriller mystery. So give me a page number between 1 and 270.
About 77.
Okay. And a sentence between, say, 1 and 8.
Let's go with 7.
Okay. Oh, okay. So this is kind of weird. So I'm going to read this, and then you give me a sentence or two, whatever you want to do, and I'll do a sentence or two. And after a couple minutes, I'll just I'll call it a day. The music was louder now, being piped from overhead speakers, and I could put a name to it. The Hokey Pokey, that all-time nursery school hit.
All right. That seemed very odd. The Hokey Pokey. Why would they be playing the Hokey Pokey at 11:30 at night in a nursing home?
I walked down the hallway. It was darker than I expected, and there was that familiar smell, the antiseptic, and there was a bit of a sweetness to it too, which I could only imagine was a little bit of decay. My grandmother wasn't expecting me at this late hour, but I think she'd still be happy that I arrived. But it was awful weird in these corridors.
It was quiet, other than the music playing now in the distance that I had walked away from. What I was walking towards was eerily silent. The room that I remembered my grandmother to be in was empty. Across from her, it was not. But what was inside there was something that I never would have expected.
Before I walked into the room, I looked down the corridor to my right, to the nurse's station. Reliably, it was always manned, but at this hour it wasn't. I turned my attention back to the door. I pushed it open slowly, and I saw 4 of them sitting on the floor. They looked like what they had a kids' game in between them, but none of them were children.
By now, I wished my grandmother was by my side. None of the people before me were her, and I had no idea at this point where she was. with no one around, there was only the four before me to ask for directions. They sat motionless, the game propped in between them, half played, but I had no other choice but to approach slowly to the closest one and reach out my hand and touch their cold gray shoulder.
The man whose shoulder I touched didn't react at all to my fingers on him. And it was at that moment I peered over him to see the game that they were playing. And that's when I realized it wasn't a game at all. It was a Ouija board. And none of them looked up to me at all. None of them seemed to know I existed. And then one of them asked a question, not to me, not to the others, but to the game itself. "Tell us what happened to Marilyn," the woman said. Marilyn is my grandmother's name.
At this point, I realized exactly where my grandmother was. She was all around us. As I stared, the piece on the Ouija board slowly began to move. I could hear it scratching across the cardboard. Other than the slight remnants of the hokey pokey in the distance, it was the only sound. It slowly went back and forth, spelling out letters that would eventually be my name.
I think we're going to call it there. That was great. That was creepy as shit. Like I read that first sentence and my thought is, yeah, hokey pokey in some kind of place that wouldn't make sense. I was thinking like an EDM concert or something like that. And when you said nursing home, I'm like, oh, that's creepy as hell. And it totally actually brought my father had been in a nursing home, a memory care facility, and it totally brought back the memories of just like what that place was like. But yeah, that was nice and creepy. I hope that doesn't damage your reputation as a
No, you know what's
Hansit.
No, what's actually funny is like, one of the projects I'm working on right now, that's why I picked the Stephen King choice, is I'm working on a middle grade collection of scary stories. So like I'm right now, that's sort of the area that I'm kind of focused on. So it just so happens that in the one story I'm writing, it's about a funeral parlor and a girl who has to sleep over at a funeral parlor. So I guess that's where my mind's at, is that elderly people, and yeah.
That's great.
Weird.
My only experience with YA is I was actually in a R.L. Stine anthology, and I wrote this story, and the only person who looked at it, who edited it, was my daughter, who was I think probably 14 at the time, and she would like circle stuff like, you could do better than this, and yeah, they got accepted, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I was published with R.L. Stine, but that was my only experience with YA. But it was a lot of fun. But it's you have to really understand, like, is this too scary? Is this not scary enough? And you realize with kids, because I teach in schools as well, and you realize with kids, like, man, kids watch stuff that I don't want to watch that's too intense for me. I mean, middle schoolers watch the craziest stuff on TV. And, it's you can't really underestimate, how dark these kids, these current society's kids can be.
I have a special one. So my son's 14. He is obsessed with horror and Halloween and all these things. So when he was around 9 years old, he asked me if he could watch a horror movie. And so I said, probably against my better judgment, my wife's a wedding photographer, so she's not here on Saturday nights. So on Saturday night, we started with the original Child's Play.
Oh,
from that moment
so
on,
creepy.
It is very creepy. So I didn't know what I was doing, though, because he was 9 at the time. He's 14 now. He has a list running. We have seen together over 140 horror movies. Okay, so basically every Friday night we've seen everything. Independent movies, every one of the mainstream.
Wow.
Movies. He just loves this stuff. So I mean, he has seen things that he probably should not have seen. But I hope it right now he's big into YouTube and things like that. He's got his own YouTube channel, and so I'm hoping that he really goes into a career of designing or something like that in the horror business.
Wow. Wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, listen, man, it was great talking to you. I appreciate you kind of sharing your journey and your life lessons. And I think readers and listeners will, especially aspiring writers, will take a lot from this. So I appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
All right, man. Take it easy.
You
See
too.
ya.
Bye.
That was my conversation with Daniel Jude Miller. I told you he was entertaining, and it's very interesting to talk to. I really appreciated hearing his path to get to where he is now, and his ability to make things work as a writer and illustrator in a way that gives him the creative and emotional freedom that makes him very engaged with his career. If you want to know more about him, you can go to his website, which I highly encourage you to do because it's really well done. And if you're a school, you can find a link on his website to be able to arrange for an author visit. Just go to djudemiller.com. If you want to know more about me, you can go to my website, carterwilson.com. There's no link to book me for schools. I don't do a lot of schools. I don't have a restraining order or anything like that. I just don't do a lot of schools. But I would go to your school and I would teach your kids how to write thrillers in a way that would probably horrify their parents. But I would still do it. Just go to carterwilson.com. You can also sign up for my newsletter there. Anyway, that was great. Thank you very much for watching and/or listening. More episodes coming out soon. In the meantime, take care.